Mhm. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Steve Gibbons. Once again, I'm the executive director of the Bridges Foundation in St. Louis. We are an organization that offers the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius Loyola in everyday life, and we've been doing that for about 35 years now. So monthly, we've been having conversations with members of our community, our other people in the bigger world who are doing things in the world of Ignatian spirituality. And today, I'm pleased that we're being joined by author Jim Manney, whose work I have known and read and shared for a number of years now. Jim grew up in northern New Jersey. He was educated by the Jesuits at St. Peter's University, that Cinderella basketball team from last year. I'm pulling for them again this year. We'll see what happens.
The mighty Peacock.
The mighty Peacocks. So he spent his junior year at Campion Hall, which is the Jesuit college at Oxford University. As he and I were just discussing, he flirted with an academic career for a while, but dropped out to become a newspaper reporter and later an editor at the University of Michigan. He's worked for a number of different religious publishers, including Loyola Press. And today we're going to be talking about his most recent book, which is called What Matters Most and Why. And it's his sixth book on Ignatian spirituality. So Jim, welcome to Bridges Conversations.
Well, thank you, Steve. I'm very glad to be here, and I'm privileged. Glad you asked me.
Yeah,
to do that.
Good. We'll return to it later, but I think many of us in the Ignatian larger world, so to speak, perhaps came to know Jim first through his very small but impactful book about the examen called A Simple Life-Changing Prayer, and we'll talk about that a little later. So, Jim, why don't we start by just telling everybody a little bit about you and your upbringing, and kind of how you came to be immersed in Ignatian spirituality and doing the work that you've been doing.
Sure. I, as you said, Steve, I'm a cradle Catholic. Grew up in northern New Jersey and went to St. Peter's University in Jersey City, and that's where I first met the Jesuits. And I didn't meet them again for a long time after I graduated, but I did meet my wife at St. Peter's, and so that was the best thing. That's probably the best thing that ever happened to me. Happened at St. Peter's, and I was a newspaper reporter after I left graduate school. I did some technical writing. I did some corporate communication, and then I had a career in magazine and book publishing. Worked for 3 different Catholic publishers, and in the latter part of my career, I went to Loyola Press, a Jesuit publisher in Chicago, and that is where I met Ignatian spirituality. I reconnected with the Jesuits, and I became immersed in Ignatian spirituality through the work that I was doing, the books that I was editing, and I became personally turned on to Ignatian spirituality through the relationships that I had with people. I work with some of the best Ignatian writers. One of my dear friends there was David Fleming, who I think you know there in St. Louis. The late David Fleming was a wonderful interpreter of Ignatian spirituality, and I worked with him. I worked with William Barry and Chris Lowney and James Martin and these other distinguished authors. Then in the early 2000s, I made a brief retreat. Loyola Press sent me on a retreat, and I met George Aschenbrenner, who is one of these legendary early Jesuits, and George was very instrumental in popularizing the examen. And he taught me how to pray the examen, and that opened up the gates of Ignatian spirituality for me. And then it eventually turned into kind of a vocation or a mission to write about Ignatian spirituality and try to explain it and bring it to a larger audience. So my first book was about the examen, A Simple Life-Changing Prayer. it's the most popular thing I've ever written, maybe the best thing I've ever written. I also wrote books on discernment and the spiritual exercises and decision making. Wrote a book called Ignatian Spirituality A to Z, and then I retired several years ago from Loyola Press and took on this project, which became What Matters Most and Why. So that's my latest book. Who knows? Maybe my last book. I don't know. But
well, we hope not. But yeah, so let's talk. I wish I could hold up a copy of the book, which I have, and I have been reading. My wife and I have both been reading it every morning as part of our daily routine, and I left it out in the other room, so I can't show a picture of it yet, but we'll take care of that later. But there you go. Thank you. Very striking book. It is. It's a collection of 365 reflections. And they are each reflection begins with a little quote from another Jesuit or Ignatian writer or people outside of those traditions too, and then your reflection on that. And it's my wife and I found it both. It's just a really meaningful and deep daily reflection that kind of for us recalls some moment of our own experiences with the exercises. So tell us a little bit about why this book and why this format. Why did you decide to go with the daily format, and how did the book kind of come about?
Well, it's a simple format. It's this genre of book is called a daily reader. It's a reading. For every day, I have a reading from another source. Most of them are from Ignatius and from the Ignatian tradition, but I also cast a wide net and have books from or quotes from psychologists, screenwriters, novels, even quotes from Hindu and Buddhist and Jewish texts, and the reason I did that, the book has kind of an ambitious goal, and the goal is to explain Ignatian spirituality and to kind of evangelize for it. I'm just going to read a little bit of at the end of the introduction. I think this kind of puts it well what my intention for the book was. It says, I say, I hope this book helps you find a better way of living. Ignatian spirituality did that for me. Only a few philosophies and ethical systems have the chops to do this. The bold claim of this book is that Ignatian spirituality is one of them. It has forever changed the way we think about God. It has already given hope and direction to millions of people. If you set your mind to it and put your heart in it, Ignatian spirituality can do that for you too. So I'd like to bring the graces of Ignatian spirituality to a broader audience. This book is for people who know about Ignatian spirituality and for people who don't know about it. And so that's one of the reasons why I drew from many sources, and that's my aim. I at some point when I was learning about Ignatian spirituality, there was a point where I thought, this is the best stuff in the world. This is a a spirituality that has everything. It explains, the purpose of life. It's got, it addresses the big philosophical questions, but it also gives you a daily path and a lot of very practical tools to live your life. And it kind of swept me off my feet then. And I'd like that to happen for other people too.
Yeah, for sure. Before we move on, there are a few people watching live. Thank you for being here. If you have a question or two for Jim, feel free to leave it right there in the comment section on Facebook, and I will see that, and we'll get to them a little bit later. So listen carefully and submit your questions, as they say. So let me circle back to that, what we were just talking about, Jim. And I think, why is it that you think this 500-year-old way of thinking and praying and discerning still resonates with us modern day creatures, so to speak? What is it about what Ignatius brought to us?
Well, I think to a large degree, or to a very significant degree, that maybe it's kind of unrealized. We live in an Ignatian world. I mean, you point to things like cognitive behavioral therapy. The main source of psychotherapy. I think its roots are in Ignatian spirituality. The 12-step movement, which is probably the most dynamic spiritual movement of the 20th and 21st centuries, is a thoroughly Ignatian point of view. The modern study of decision making, the idea that there's the distinction that many people often make between spirituality and religion. I think you can trace that. Ignatius would probably be horrified to hear it, but Ignatius did say that God deals with each of us individually. We each have our own individual relationship with God, and we can have that and develop that. Christian humanism, social justice movements, these are all just the whole idea, the whole notion of activist Christianity, that Christian people should work for a better world, I think is an idea that Ignatius, that was not the conventional wisdom 500 years ago, and Ignatius made it the conventional wisdom. So that is this is an Ignatian world, and I think that Ignatian spirituality is very compatible with. I think it encourages reflective self-awareness. It's very sympathetic to the modern idea that God is present in all things, and the idea of discernment, being alert to our biases, being suspicious of large, big theories. It takes feelings and desires seriously.
Are you trying to tell me that mindfulness is not a new idea?
It's not a new idea. Mindfulness and awareness is something that Ignatius taught us to practice. So I think it's a point of view, and it's a spiritual perspective that's very attractive to the modern mind.
Yeah, agreed. I'm going to ask you at some point to read one of the reflections to give the folks here an idea of how this might. Did you pick one of those out to maybe share with us?
Yeah, I'd like to pick one, and this kind of picks up on what I was just talking about how relevant Ignatian spirituality is. I think I'd like to read the reflection and commentary from February 28th, just a few days ago, the end of February. This book is organized into themes, monthly themes, that are I believe are kind of key themes in Ignatian thinking: awareness, freedom, desire, work, humility. And the theme for February was perspectives on God, the Ignatian take on God, so to speak. And the last reading of the month is called Ignatian Optimism, and the reading is from a professor, Ronald Madras, who taught at the University of St. Louis for many years. He wrote a wonderful book called, or St. Louis University. A wonderful book called Ignatian Humanism. And this is what here's the quote that I used from his book. He said, Ignatius was impressed by the fact that God spoke to him despite his sinfulness. That implied a liberality to God's giving and forgiving. If God would speak to him, he would speak to anyone. So this is what I have to say about that quote, my commentary. When God caught his attention, Ignatius was no one special, an indifferent Christian, a proud man with a bad temper and an eye for the ladies. Yet God sought him out and remade his life anyway. This filled him with joy and gratitude and shaped his worldview. Thus, it's no surprise that the Ignatian spirit radiates optimism and hope. Ignatius saw God as nearby, present everywhere in the world, and generous with his gifts. Plenty of people are pessimistic, including religious people, sometimes especially religious people. Things are bad, getting worse, and God is stingy with his grace. Which view is more convincing? Consider the fact that God has reached out to you. Look at the material and spiritual blessings in your life. What have you done to deserve this? Not much. Most likely, you're like Ignatius, an ordinary person who has been touched by grace. God is generous, not stingy. His grace is abundant, not scarce. God wants to meet everyone, even the likes of you. So that's I like that, and I think actually that message of optimism is one that I think we need to hear in our pessimistic times, in our our gloomy times, sometimes our gloomy church. Ignatius wants us to know that God is with us and his grace is abundant, and he's reaching out to us all the time, and that we can rely on that. So that's an example of, I picked that because I think it illustrates kind of the relevance and the appeal of Ignatian spirituality, and also the kind of book it is. It's simple. Try to give reflections that are thoughtful and practical, and to teach something about Ignatian spirituality as well.
Yeah. Someone, I can't remember who it was, and I'm probably paraphrasing also, but someone once said there is or should be no room in the church for gloomy Christians, and yet, as you say, there are plenty, and maybe even ourselves sometimes, right?
Sure.
I think the other thing, and you mentioned this earlier, one of the things that comes out of Ignatian spirituality and the exercises is freedom. And you mentioned that as one of the overriding themes of the book. I think for some people, again, maybe the doom and gloomers, the last thing they think they're getting from religion or God is freedom. They may have felt like they've been trapped into something. Can you talk a little bit about the spiritual freedom that comes from this approach to God?
Yeah, I think freedom, Ignatius, says that we need to, the key to making good choices is to achieve a condition of indifference, what he calls indifference, before the alternatives. And I think that what that means is detachment. That means freedom, freedom to choose the good, choose what God wants, choose the thing that gives you the deepest joy. And that's a very profound, that's a very difficult task. I mean, the task of discernment is achieving freedom from your disordered attachments. It's not easy. Also, I also think that freedom is a great responsibility. I often, a wonderful quote. I often quote this. There's a wonderful book called Mariette in Ecstasy by Ron Hansen, who is a deacon and a professor of English at Santa Clara University, Jesuit University in California. And Ron is a great writer in the Ignatian tradition. And he's the end of this book. There's a woman who's talking about her spiritual life, and this is what she says about her spiritual life. She's describing it to somebody else. We try to be formed and held and kept by him, but instead he offers us freedom. And now when I try to know his will, his kindness floods me, his great love overwhelms me, and I hear him whisper, "Surprise me." And I think that's the gift and the burden of Ignatian freedom. Often I think God says to us, "I've formed you. I love you. I've taught you. I've filled you with grace. I've given you all these people. I've given you all these opportunities, and now surprise me. You're You decide, you do the work. Not every situation is like that, but many are. I think it's the exhilaration and joy and responsibility of Ignatian freedom is very alive to me.
Yeah. Funny you should say that. I in one of the talks that I give to our retreatants, I say that my great takeaway from the spiritual exercises is waking up every morning and saying to God, surprise me. So
God
we're
might
on
be
the same. Yep.
saying it to you. Surprise me, Steve.
That's right.
Yeah.
So listen, if there's again, we got a few minutes left here. And if anybody has a question, please feel free to ask in these closing minutes. Jim, let's while we're waiting to see if there's any questions, let's go back to the examen. You've mentioned it once, and you've mentioned it that the A Simple Life-Changing Prayer was your first book. What do you think is? I mean, again, we've touched on this already, but let's go back. What is the power of this simple daily life-changing prayer?
For me, and I think I've heard other people talk about it too, is that for me, it showed me that God is present in my life here and now. I kind of grew up with an idea of God as being remote and being somewhere out there in a kind of a psychological or spiritual way. Now, the examine taught me that God is right here in my work. He's here at this very moment when I'm talking to you and talking to others here. He's present in my work and in my relationships and in my personal experience. That was a very, very powerful understanding for me. It changed. It just really opened the door to a lot of other things. But yeah, it has the examine has other benefits too. I mean, I never run out of things to pray about. There's it takes the in the battle with myself. It kind of takes my mind off myself and onto others and in my work and things outside myself. Yeah, it was just, it came to me as a great gift, and it still is the anchor for my prayer and my reflection. I also think that the daily examine is really it's not something that you do, not simply something that you do once or twice a day, but it's a way of thinking. This reflective attitude, this idea that God is present, God is always inviting us to respond to Him. It engenders in us a reflective attitude that can permeate the whole day. I have a friend of mine who was recently learning about Ignatian spirituality, and he was learning about the examine, and I asked him how it was going, and he said, "Oh, it's fine. I prayed the examine 15 or 20 minutes at the end of the day." He says, "But I find myself thinking that way all through the day." And I said, "Yep, that's the power of the examine."
Yeah, it goes beyond prayer to, I think, becoming more prayerful, right?
Yeah.
Of filling that day. So,
yeah.
let me do a couple announcements here while we give people one more chance if they have any questions or comments. If you would like more information on our programs, there's our website there, bridgesfoundation.org. We have a 9-month retreat in everyday life that is the full, what's called the 19th annotation version of Ignatius's spiritual exercises. We begin in September, and we have free information sessions throughout the summer. So check us out, and my contact information is easily found on that website. If you want to reach out, please do. Once again, here's a little more information on Jim and his books, JimManneyBooks.com. Are you doing anything these days besides writing? Do you do workshops or speaking or anything like that? Is that part of what you do?
Yeah, currently a spiritual director, another an Ignatian spiritual director, and I are doing we're doing a book study in connection with Manresa Retreat House here in Michigan. It's a Zoom workshop. It's a book study on William Barry's book, A Friendship Like No Other, which is a wonderful book. I recommend it to everybody. The idea of the book is that God wants a relationship of friendship with us, and we're exploring that. So we've done a few things like that. And, I haven't traveled much for speaking, but I have learned how to do this on Zoom.
Yeah, we've all learned to do a lot of things on Zoom we never dreamed possible.
Right.
Next month, our next Bridges conversation will be about a month from today on Friday, April 7th. And I'll be speaking with longtime Bridges prayer companion, Pam Mason, who's also our site coordinator at our site at St. Matthew the Apostle Church in North St. Louis, and in a very traditional and successful African-American neighborhood. So we'll be talking about all of that with Pam. Pam was our speaker at our Majus group just this past weekend. So here's our friend Denny Klosterman, who's another one of our site coordinators. Just to comment, he says, I like the book, Let God Find Us. Really helped with my understanding of Ignatian spirituality. Is that one of your books? Sorry, I didn't.
God Finds Us. It's a book. It's about my experiences making the spiritual exercises.
And
awesome. Thank you, Denny. I appreciate that.
Yeah, good. Denny will be coordinating our site at St. Louis University High School. Is this year and will be next year. So if that's something any of you are interested in, please know we have that site too. So where did all my things go? Oh, these are mine. Sorry. Technology, me and technology. Here you go. So, all right. Well, I think we're about done then for the day. Jim, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve.
You're welcome. If you want to hold on just a minute after we go off the air here, you and I can touch base.
Sure.
On one other thing. Thank you all for tuning in. This conversation will be archived both on the Facebook page and within a few days also on the Bridges website, and it also lives somewhere out on YouTube because that's how we share it. So check that out if you haven't seen it yet. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Jim. And we'll see you all in April.
Thanks.